If you know anything about Volvos, you'll probably remember the brick-shaped tanks of the late 20th century. But in case you don't, I'm going to give you a brief history lesson. For nearly 30 years, Volvo used the same formula to build robust, reliable Swedish tanks. It started in the 1970s with the 200 series, continued in the 1980s with the 700 series, and finally came to a sad and untimely end in the late 90s with the 900 series. Despite some key differences throughout the years, Volvo used basically the same formula from the 200 series all the way through the 900 series, which was spearheaded by the use of rear-wheel drive and the venerable B230F inline four-cylinder red block engine. One of my favorite things to tell my friends when they're asking for reliable cars is to look around town and see the old cars driving around. And chances are, if you see 20 or 30-year-old cars still on the roads, those are the most reliable cars. Chances are, the last time you drove down to your local supermarket to stock up on milk, bread, and eggs, you've probably seen several dozen of these bricks running around. And that's because these cars were really just built that good. You see, Volvo built these cars to survive harsh Swedish winters. They're durable, built to tackle rough roads and sub-freezing climates, and that's why they last so long. Eventually, Volvo decided it was time to make a radical change, namely shifting their entire brand to a front-wheel drive-based platform spearheaded by the Volvo 850. Before the Swedish mainstay finally decided to axe the old-school brick, they released this, the 960, which served as a swan song which paid homage to all the bricks that came before it, and also gave us a sneak preview of what was to come in the future. We'll start under the hood, where for once you won't find Volvo's famous red block engine. Instead, you'll find this, Volvo's 2.9-liter inline six-cylinder white block aluminum engine, which was co-developed with Porsche. Not only was this a very unique engine to be seen in an old brick like this, but it was also a sneak preview of the engines that were coming in the future. This was actually the first iteration of the white block engine, except it has one extra cylinder. One of my favorite things to do with unsuspecting victims the first time they see my car is have them take a brief gander at the exterior. You see, from the outside, this thing looks like an old brick, an old school Volvo with boxy angles and something your grandmother might drive. And then I have them guess what the engine is going to look like when I open the hood. People are always surprised when I open the hood, and what you'll actually find under there is a fairly race car looking engine. Very large and sleek looking. One other important thing to note under here, and it's actually a pretty significant downside of this engine, is that it uses a timing belt, which isn't all that uncommon. Tons of cars use timing belts. However, most cars can go 70,000+ miles between changes. Whereas in this car, when it was released in '92, at least for the US market, the timing belt interval changes were every 20,000 miles, which is ridiculous. And in my experience, most people I know wouldn't want to be opening their wallet every 20,000 miles to change their timing belt. Also, it is worth mentioning that later versions came with an upgraded pulley and balancer system, which extended the timing belt interval to every 30,000 miles, which honestly isn't such a big improvement, and it's still a downside. You also don't want to push the boundaries of that interval because this is an interference engine, unlike the red block engine. If you blow a timing belt in the red block engine, the engine just goes out of time, but it's not such a big deal. In this car, if you blow the timing belt, you'll destroy your engine, and that will cost you even more money. Up next on the interior, you'll also find this homeless man, which I'd urge you to ignore. And you'll also find this Aisin Warner 30-40 transmission, which is fancy Japanese for electronically controlled. Now, not only is this transmission super smooth shifting out on the road, but it also features various drive modes. You can choose from winter, sport, and economy modes. And while the differences between sport and economy are fairly minimal, I will say the winter mode did save me once. I took this 960 on a multi-day road trip up to Maine, and I was driving on a backcountry road when all of a sudden a Ford F-250 on bald tires came around the corner and was sliding directly towards me. At the time, there were only the three of us on the road. Me, a Tesla Model S, and this F-250. And guess which car the F-250 chose to swerve towards? Not the $90,000 Tesla, but this old brick. Anyway, in order to avoid getting hit by the F-250, I had to swerve into a snowbank. and I did avoid the collision, but once I was parked there, I couldn't get out. So I was kind of reluctant, but I did switch the car into winter mode, and lo and behold, the old brick climbed out of that snowbank ever so slowly, and it was the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed. If that didn't happen, I would have still been in Maine till this day. Next up, we'll move to the backseat of the 960, where Volvo's traditional practicality is in full swing. Now, it goes without saying that there's plenty of leg and headroom in the backseat of this car, but one significant advantage the 900 and 700 series have over the 200 series is that it has a 60/40 folding rear seat, so that if you have it configured like I have here, you have room for all your long cargo items as well as your passengers. That's pretty cool. Another really cool and futuristic feature you'll see back here is a built-in child seat, which folds down from the center seat here. This is a feature that Volvo still uses to sell cars to this day, and it's really cool to see it featured here 30 years ago. And of course, it wouldn't be a 90s wagon without a third seat, which is sickening. All right, we are driving the Volvo 960. It has been 30 years since this car was sold new, and you might be wondering how it drives. And compared to the 240, it's definitely a much different driving experience, but honestly, it drives pretty similar to most modern cars. The steering is really good, it has some good weight to it, and I've been in a lot of modern cars that have like really light steering, and I don't like that. Like, it just feels, you know, like you don't feel very connected to the road. But in these older cars I drive, a lot of them actually have really good steering feel, which I like. The transmission is also very smooth, definitely tuned towards luxury driving. It's not very quick shifting, but it shifts very smooth and comfortably. And it's great on the highway. Like, you can cruise at 80 miles an hour and keeps the RPMs pretty low. It's well geared for highway driving. And now we're here out on this kind of straight residential street going 30 miles an hour, and the car drives really smooth. I mean, it's definitely a great car to drive every day. It's super comfortable. Volvo is known for their seats. As someone who drives a Toyota Prius most of the time, unfortunately, these seats are just not comfortable at all. I drove cross country in the Prius and took my ass like a month to recover from that. I mean, these seats are on another level. It's super comfortable. And as for the acceleration, it's pretty slow. It does get up and go decently, like you're not going to be holding up traffic in this car, and it doesn't sound good. That's my biggest kind of complaint about this car. As far as braking goes, you know, this car has ABS. Braking feels great. It's a modern system, you know, 4-wheel hydraulic dual circuit disc brake system with anti-lock brakes. So, you know, it drives just like a modern car, and I really love it. So the whole thing is that they call it a third seat. It's not a third row seat.